Hello, good morning. Welcome to Learn with Lorna episode 149. So welcome to Learn with Lorna 149. My name is Lorna Steele-McGinn. I'm the Community Engagement Officer with the Highland Archive Service. The Highland Archive Service has 4 archive centres across the north of Scotland that look after the historic documents of this part of the world. So we have a centre in Inverness, the Highland Archive Centre. We have a centre in Fort William, Loch Aber Archives, Skye and Loch Alsh Archive Centre in Portree, and Nucleus, the Nuclear and Caithness Archives in Wick. This series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is our umbrella organisation and it is a charity registered in Scotland. There's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of talks, but if you're able to donate towards our work, then we're very, very grateful for that. I know as I say that every week that's a long kind of introduction, but every bit of that has come about because of something that's happened in the past where we thought that needed to be kind of expressly said. So that's why I always start with that. So as I say, welcome to this week's episode, the latest in our May theme of business and industry. And this week we're looking at one particular collection held at the Highland Archive Centre in Inverness, D1371. And if you've been watching for a while, you'll know the D means that it's a deposited collection. It's not a local authority collection. It's something that's been given to us by a family or a business or a club and so on, so deposited with us for safekeeping. And this is D1371, the Taylor of Munlochy collection. This collection dates from the 19th and 20th centuries. I haven't put a specific date on that. The reason is because some of the earliest items in this are photographs and postcards where we don't have a specific date, but we're working with a rough estimate. It comprises 3 boxes and 7 volumes, and it includes business records, property documents, plans, family correspondence, photographs, postcards, and quite unusually, it also includes objects. And this collection relates to one of those wonderful little shops that you certainly found very much. You still find in some, but not as many, in small communities, the kind of shops that just fulfill a myriad of needs for that community. So you can see with some of the things that I've listed there, unlike some of our other business collections, that this is a family business, and therefore there's an overlap between the running of the business and the family life. So who were the family? What was the business? I wanted to start by locating where the business is, because I know some people will be watching locally and others won't, so I'm seeing Edinburgh and Essex and different places, so some of you might not be as familiar with the area. So this collection relates to a business in Munlochy. Munlochy is a small village on the Black Isle. It's about 10 miles north of Inverness, but the story starts in another Black Isle village in Och, about 4 miles away. William Taylor was born in Och in 1815. He would live through to 1909, so he was 95. But as I wrote that down, I thought, imagine living from 1815 to 1909. Like, that is it's a long life anyway, but it's an extraordinary period of life to cover. Everything changes, really, in that period. At the age of about 27, he married Catherine Ross. That was in 1842, which was an important year for him because not only did he get married, but it was also the year that he founded the business A. Taylor and Son of Munlochy. He also carried on the farming and agricultural work that the family had done at Gateside, so that kind of ran alongside it for a while. The business was started in the post office buildings in Munlochy, started as a post office and general merchants and chemist. So as I say, it's hard to imagine now, apart from the big supermarkets, a shop that would be a post office, a general merchant and a chemist, selling a really wide range of products and providing different services to that community. William, incidentally, as well as farming and running this business, was also a shoemaker. Now, William and Catherine had 7 children: Alexander, Jessie, William, Anne, John, Daniel, and another John. And it was the oldest child, Alexander, who took on the family business after his father. So he worked alongside his father and then took it on afterwards. Alexander the son was in charge in the 1870s, when the business was moved out of those post office buildings into newly built premises on the main street of Munlochy, where it would remain for the next 140 years or so. Those premises were then enlarged in that decade as well, in the 1870s. And the reason for the move of the business was because of Alexander's marriage. He married Catherine Fraser, and as part of that, the property was available for him to move into, or move the business into. During Alexander's tenure in charge of A. Taylor and Son, the business was a grocer's, a draper's, and a tailor's. So again, that real range of things that they could offer to the community. And Alexander, like all of the family members, as we'll see, was completely immersed in the community. So as well as running this shop, which would have been a lifeline for so many surrounding families and businesses, he was also immersed in a lot of other community activities. In the 1880s, there was a need for a new free church in Munlochy. The original free church, and if you've watched previous episodes, you'll know that the disruption had only happened not even 40 years earlier. And the original free church in Munlochy had been a wooden building, and it was now around 40 years old. And so they needed to build a new free church. And the building was estimated that it would cost over £1,600, £1,500, somewhere around there. And Alexander Taylor threw himself into fundraising for this. And according to Arch Highland, who, if you're local, you'll be familiar with, a wonderful organisation focusing on archaeology and heritage. According to some research they did, the amount of effort Alexander Taylor put into fundraising for the church might have been a little bit to the detriment of the business, which suffered a wee bit as he strove to raise money for this new free church. The free church was built in 1886, and since then it's been a United Free Church and is now a Church of Scotland. In the end, it cost around £2,000. So, yeah, if there was an impact on the business, certainly was at a cost of the church being a substantial cost. And of course, Alexander wasn't the only fundraiser. There were a group of people supporting that. Alexander would, like his father, live a very long life. He died at the age of 85 in 1928. And he and his wife had 8 children: John, Catherine, Maggie, Jessie, William, Alexander, Margaret, and James. 3 of those children would die in infancy, surviving only a few weeks or a few months each: John, Maggie, and William. And another child, Margaret, would die in her early 20s. And then the youngest child, James MacLeod Taylor, fell victim to the huge crisis of the early 20th century, the Great War. James was born in Munlochy on the 3rd of July 1887, and by the time World War I broke out, he had already lost 4 of his siblings. So he had lost those 3 as children, and then 1 in her 20s. We have some pictures of James as a child. I love looking at pictures of children going back 100 years or so, and the pictures of him are quite fascinating. He's staring down the camera quite determinedly. In 1916, when he was in his late 20s, James would become better known as Private Taylor, number 1674 of the Royal Army Medical Corps. We have photos from this time too, much more serious, almost like he's seen more of life by the time these photos are taken. On the 15th of April 1917, James was aboard HMT Arcadian, HMT being hired military transport ships, so ships that were taken over to be used for transporting the troops. And he was on aboard HMT Arcadian as it steamed in convoy from Salonika to Alexandria. There were around 1,300 men, troops and crew on board the ship. And the ship was hit by German U-boat fire, a torpedo, and sank within minutes, and 277 men were drowned, including James MacLeod Taylor. He's remembered, along with around 500 others, nurses, officers and men of the Commonwealth forces, who died when transport ships and hospital ships were lost in the Mediterranean. He's remembered on the Micra Memorial in Thessalonica, And the memorial is there, and I found this really emotional, as you would expect, when I read that the reason the memorial is there is because that's where bodies kept washing up and were washed ashore. Some were identified, and that's where some were buried. And so many, around 500 of those troops and hospital ship people and so on, were recorded on that memorial. So that's another blow for the parents who, as well as running this business at home, being invested in supporting the church and the local community, have now lost 5 of their children. It was their 6th child, Alexander, James's brother, who would take on the family business in 1922, 6 years before his father died. James was 1880 to 1963. In 1907, Alexander Jr. Married Mary Fraser, and they had 4 children, John, Colin, Alistair and Charles. And it's these 2 generations really that are particularly represented in this collection, both from a business perspective and from a family perspective. Before taking over this business, the 3rd generation to do so, Alexander the younger had trained as a tailor, and he employed a number of people in that trade. And when he took over A. Taylor and Son of Munlochy, it was run as a general merchants and drapers. We have business ledgers from this period and order books, and by looking through these big hefty books, which I did yesterday afternoon, you can just learn all sorts of things about the business, about community, about society. So for instance, you can see that on the 24th of November 1922, the Reverend John Dow of Knockbane Manse bought biscuits, soap, bread, rinso and soft soap for 4 shillings and 9pence. His full page, so there's full pages of accounts for each different person, and his goes on to include ribbons and needles and food and polish and garden hose, rabbits, hot water bottles, and you just really get a sense of this shop and all the things that it had crammed into it. That same month, Swede MacDonald at Gateside Smithy bought treacle, salt, tobacco, papers, spices, naphtha soap, lamp glass, matches, candles, enameline, and lots of other different things. So you can get some ideas of brands, and I know a lot of people love brands that don't exist anymore. So there's Rinso there's enameline. I'll come back to some more later on. But yeah, you just really get a feel for the business. And of course, this is not a self-service shop. This is a shop with a counter where you come in and say what you want and the staff go and get it for you. If you start looking ahead a few years within those ledgers, you can see other items and you can see the business broadening. So by the 1930s and 40s, there are people coming in and buying shirts, tweed caps, boys' stockings, a stockingette bodice. So there you go. All I thought was that sounds really uncomfortable. You can see that the hotel in Munlochy was supplied with things like table bases, curtain rings, jacks, saucepans, washboards. So again, that very domestic for one person and supplying the local hotel. A series of entries that I found really, really interesting, to the point that I was taking photos of them all and sending them around my colleagues going, look at this, were records relating to the Glasgow Corporation Public Assistance Department from the 1930s and 1940s. And the reason I was so struck by that, these orders contain references, lots of people ordering jotters, pencils, rubbers, notebooks, bootlaces, all being charged to the Glasgow Corporation. And my assumption is that those items were for the children who were boarded out from Glasgow to the Highlands in the 1930s and 40s. Now, most records relating to those, excuse me, most items relating to those children will be found in the Glasgow City Archives at the Mitchell Library. So if you want to trace the story of a child who was boarded out, then generally Glasgow is the place to go. But I just turned the page and found this small insight into the impact that those children had on the local community and the local business, and how it's just another place to find those children referenced, not by name, not by anything personal, but just an insight into the fact that of course they needed jotters and pencils to do their work, and so the local business supplied those. Now, in addition to running that shop in Munlochy, Alec, bought a van, and apparently it was the first Model T van in the area, and he drove around the west coast selling drapery goods. And I'm seeing your comment there, Isabel, that you're listening with your mum who worked with Taylor's Munlochy. That's lovely. I hope that some of these things coming into these later years will maybe spark some memories, because I think that running the van carried on for many years. So he used to drive around the west coast selling drapery goods, and that was something that carried on through other generations. After Alexander Sr.'s death in 1928, the shop was split. Alexander, the younger Alexander, kept half of it as tailor's, while the other half was let by his sister to another family, Riddichs, who used it as a grocer's. And they would stay side by side, those two businesses, for around 30 years. Alexander lived a long life. He lived to 83, and he left a legacy, not only in a business which was well known and well loved across the Black Isle and beyond, but also, like his father Alexander Sr., he was well known and well regarded for his support of the local community and the local church. There is a very lovely, lovely obituary that I came across written about him and about his kind of steadfastness in the community. And I've spoken a lot about that over this series of talks, of those people who remain constant and are the go-to people in a community, and how important they are. Alexander died in 1963. He had lived with the loss of those 3 baby siblings. Although they had died just prior to his birth, they would still have kind of played a role in his life, I think. He then lost that sister in adulthood, and then his brother to war. And he was one of that generation, dying in 1963, who lived through the First and the Second World Wars. So not only did he lose a brother to World War I, but he then had to watch his son serve in World War II when he was in his mid-60s. And we hold a large number of letters written by two of his sons, two of his and his wife's sons. Alistair, who was a private during World War II in the Middle East and in Italy, and another series of letters written by his brother Colin. I've spoken before about the fact that I love reading letters sent from both world wars, because they convey information and feelings in a way that really nothing else can. And they also always, I think, show something that I think is constantly surprised to those of us who have had no military service experience. That the complete juxtaposition of the life that people lived when they were serving. So there are long periods in every letter from the front I have read, both First and Second World War, they display evidence of long periods of waiting, long periods of boredom, but interspersed by periods of intense fear and action. And I just think that's quite hard for those of us who haven't been in that situation to imagine. Many days are almost normal, except they're in very surreal, strange circumstances where you have to get up and practice military drill first thing. But then nothing happens, and they go swimming and they sit about. But always with that fear hanging over them of what might happen today or tomorrow. They're also, letters from the front are a great reminder of those long waits for communication. So for instance, this 1941 letter written by Alistair to his parents illustrates some of that. My dear Mum and Dad, I am 2 days late in writing to you this week, but I don't suppose it will make very much difference, as you won't be getting my letters singly but in a bunch. I received your cable today, which was a very pleasant surprise, and I'm very glad to know that you're all well at home. I sent you 2 cables. I hope you got them both, because you didn't mention cables, you only mentioned cable. I have nothing very much to write about this time, only that we're getting ready for Christmas in the camp here. We're having a concert and a whist drive, the concert on Christmas night and the whist drive on Boxing night. I'll be more able to tell you how we spent Christmas in the desert when I write next Sunday. This is the 15th letter I have written to you. I really hope you are getting them all. I must say again that I feel very happy now that I have received your cable as I wasn't sure if you were getting any word from me at all. I must stop now. I will write you a long letter next time. Your very loving son, Alistair. Another letter says, we have so much time on our hands. But I was particularly touched by one from 1940 in which Alistair said to his parents, I'm very fit and well and with a fine lot of fellows, but being out here makes me think of Uncle Jim a lot. Uncle Jim, of course, who had died in the First World War. And so that constant feeling of waiting with the shadow of the previous generation hanging over you as a reminder of what the alternative is to that waiting. His parents' generation have gone through this. He knows what a war is like through stories. And he's waiting and he's spending time. And like I say, there's often a lot of references to being bored and frustrated, but you're constantly on that alert of what might happen next. Also, all of these letters, for every collection that I've read, finish with those, don't worry about me, I'm fine. You just get the feeling that his parents are absolutely sitting at home worrying. In 1942, Alistair's war journey took him to Rome, and he wrote a beautiful letter to his parents about other things, but at half of the letter he says, now then, I'm sure you will like to hear that I have been to Rome, the city of the great history and the beautiful churches. And when I say beautiful, that word is not enough. It has to be seen to be known what wonderful things can be seen here. And he goes on to talk about visiting the Vatican, different churches, the Colosseum. They only get a day there, but my favourite sentence is he says, St. Peter's in the Vatican City is a most wonderful place, too wonderful to describe. Some of our chaps who went spent the whole forenoon just in St. Peter's, so you can get an idea of how long it takes to go round. We could have seen the Pope too, but we had to choose between him or lunch. So obviously lunch took precedence. And now if I am making that time in the war sound light-hearted and easy, I absolutely don't intend to, because as I say, there's a constant shadow hanging over them. And while the family business is being run and operating at home, all of this is happening overseas. And in one letter, Alistair says he's sorry he didn't help more with the business when he was home on leave. He says, when I'm at last free and time at home is unlimited, then it will be quite different. I expect you can understand what I mean. When on leave, you constantly have in the back of your mind the thought of going back there again. And you get his concern in the letters about the family, about the business, about how things are going. Is the shop busy? But vying with the reality of what he's dealing with. We also hold letters by Alistair's brother, Colin. And Colin was part of the Allied campaign in North Africa and Italy. And like his brother, he started as a private, as a gunner. But he progressed to sergeant, to lieutenant, and then to captain. And he describes in one letter the gun drill and the 2 stiff exams that he would have to go through to pass to be promoted. We hold some airgraphs written by Colin to his parents, tiny, tiny typed pieces of paper. And in fact, when I was looking at them, they're tiny little writing, like much smaller than my hand, the piece of paper. And when I kind of screwed up my eyes to look at it, his first sentence is, my typewriting isn't all that it might be, but it's definitely the best way of doing an airgraph, because otherwise there's not even room to say hello. And then a few sentences later he says, I'm going to need to stop writing because it's getting dark. And the next sentence starts, it must have been very dark last night, as you can see by the odd hieroglyphics that are mixed up with this letter. Some of these airgraphs have been redacted by the censor with place names and things blacked out. In this particular airgraph, Colin finishes by saying, I bet you wish that Al was home again, and I'm sure he's wishing the same. And again he says, don't worry about me, I'll be okay. If you listen to this extract from from an airgraph from June 1943, and again it's that cross between the entertainment needed to fill those hours of waiting and the reality of people being killed. He says to his parents, we have had enough energy to hold a sports meeting in the evening, of course, and I was able to uphold the honour of Scotland in more Highland events, such as throwing the hammer, first place, and putting the shot in which I was only beaten by another Scot. I really have gone all athletic lately, for I was playing in goal at for the HQ team 2 nights ago, and by good luck managed to get in the way of every shot that came along. We've been doing quite well in the way of entertainment lately, and I have been at 1 concert and 1 picture show, and I'm going to a film tomorrow night. These entertainments are very welcome at the moment, for we are rather inclined to weary a bit now that we are more or less kicking our heels. Our one consolation is that it can't last much longer. Surely this time next year I'll be accompanying Edith and the boys to Rosemarkie. I was sorry to hear that Roddy Fraser has been killed out here. He was a very decent lad. I don't suppose you know what regiment he was in. I haven't been able to have any contact with any friends out here yet, but I hope to. So again, that the fun, the films and the concerts, but death is a constant reality. In addition to Colin's letters, we hold a typed diary of his war experience, and it says, transcribed with love by his sons and his grandson. And here's the opening summary of that, written by his sons and his grandson. And I think you'll agree that the diary conveys or contains more of the negatives and the reality than those letters do. The reason being, of course, that you wouldn't want to frighten your family, you wouldn't want to bring down morale, and also the censor would probably have taken them out. But this is the entry, the summary at the beginning of the diary. Diary is the account of the daily experiences of Sergeant Taylor during World War II campaign in North Africa as a member of the British 1st Divisional Artillery Regiment. He left Scotland on a troop ship in early 1943, arriving at the port of Algiers on the 9th of March. The regiment, with Sergeant Taylor on his trusty motorcycle, moved east through Algeria, arriving in Tunisia on March the 20th. At the end of April, in the Battle of Banana Ridge, they fought and defeated the Germans near Medjez al-Bab. On May the 6th, the British took Bitserta. He then describes all the places they went through before returning to Algeria. And then they put a summary. This diary describes anti-aircraft and dogfights between British Spitfires and German Messerschmitts, Daisy and Gert bombs, Bren guns, the Italian Guard who fainted on hearing of British victory, the German SS men who committed suicide rather than surrender, sharing dinner with defeated German officers, descriptions of ransacked towns, deaths of comrades, drinking scotch while under enemy fire, the minefields in no man's land, being bombed by American Mitchell planes by mistake, becoming the part-time barber for his friends in the regiment, Arabs, Frenchmen, Italians, Germans, occasional glimpses of women and the consequent excitement of the troops, the plants and flowers and animals of North Africa, gambling at cards, plugging rat holes, killing fleas, homesickness. So you really get a feel there of the reality that he couldn't tell to his parents. An extract from the 28th of April 1943 described mortar shells being dropped in front of them, and he says it's becoming more and more serious. He can see it turning into a serious event. 30 tanks and 400 men were being bombarded and pounded with mortars and were firing like mad. Messerschmitts becoming more and more active with heavy machine gun and small arms fire. So yeah, you get an idea of the reality. And of course, all of this time, the rest of the family remain at home, like so many others, running their business, being active in their community, and wondering whether their children will make it home or not. Both Alistair and Colin did return from the war, although I'm quite sure they were not unaffected by what they had seen. Colin became a teacher and married a teacher. Charles, the youngest son, became a doctor, setting up the pilot NHS scheme in Harlow, the Nuffield Health Centre. John, the oldest son, became a lecturer in anatomy at the Dick Veterinary College in Edinburgh. But it was Alistair who took on the family business. In the 1960s, he had worked alongside his father, and then when his father Alexander died in 1962, he was in charge. Alistair ran the business from the 1960s onwards, so maybe this is getting into the period that some people might remember. There are some great order books from this time as well, really revealing, just like those early ones did, really revealing their time. So by the 1960s and 70s, there are lots of orders for Brill cream, Punch and Judy toothpaste, Sunsilk shampoo, Germaline tins. And And yes, as you were saying about the prices there, Mary, quite extraordinary. 20p for, I don't know, boxes and boxes of germaline. Alistair also continued that thing that his father had been doing of taking the van round the West Coast selling drapery items. But a decline in drapery trade in the 1960s meant that in 1964, after buying back that half of the shop which had been his aunt's, Alistair converted the shop into a spar. Now, incidentally, Alistair was also a passionate beekeeper, and I'm sure, again, if people remember him, they will remember this, having hundreds of hives across the Black Isle and giving talks and lectures on the subject of beekeeping. And it was really because of this that he retired, wanting to spend more time dedicated to that interest. So between 1974 and 1989, Taylor of Munlochy was rented out, but still trading under the name of A. Taylor and Son. But it was in 1989 that Alistair's son Alan took over the business, returning from life overseas in the oil industry to do so. And a Press and Journal article from 1992, which we hold a copy of, marks the 150th birthday of this family business and the people involved in it. Now, by then, by 1992, the 150th anniversary, the business had expanded to include not just that spar, but also the spar at North Keswick, employing at that point 17 people. It actually went on to employ more. Alan spoke at that event, or he spoke in that article about the family's pride in the business and in the people that had made it. The article talks about those different family members serving their country, going to war, serving their local community, and 150 years of serving the community through the shop. In 2012, Alan retired and the co-op took on the lease of Taylor and Son of Munlochy, and it ceased trading as A. Taylor and Son at that point after 170 years. Alan, as some of you may remember, passed away just last year, marking the end of an era for Taylor and Son of Munlochy. He had continued to live at Burnside, the family home, and he had also continued another family tradition, that of community focus and dedication. He sponsored the primary school football kit and a variety of other local events, and by all accounts, although I didn't meet him, was a well-loved member of the community who again did a lot for that community. And so that's the Taylor of Munlochy collection. It contains items relating to the business, what was bought, what was sold, who was buying things, who was selling, from different companies to tailors. But also a large part of it relates to the family, relates to the impact of those sons going to fight. And I find it very interesting every time I do something like this where it looks at generations, that you start by thinking of the person as a young person, and then you watch them become the old generation as the next one take over the shop or the business. And you feel that with this family, you know, you feel Alistair and Colin going off to fight as young men, but probably anyone who does remember them, if they remember them at all, will remember them as the older generation. So yeah, the collection gives an insight into a business, into a family, into a community. And if you do have any memories of the business or of the family, please do share them. I'm seeing some people have already done so, so please do if you remember. I hope you've enjoyed that little insight into that business and that collection. I hope you can join me next week. Next week, a totally different subject. I'll be looking at mines, quarries and collieries in our collection. And I was absolutely astonished when I started looking into this yesterday, how much we have. So I hope you can join me next week. A reminder that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of events. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we're really grateful for that. Thank you for all your lovely comments, and hopefully see you next week. Thank you.